Good evening. Welcome to our regular scheduled board meeting. And at this time, we'll have roll call.
Mr. Alexander.
Present.
Mrs. Baylor.
Here.
Mr. Bravo.
Here.
Mrs. Lasher.
Here.
Mrs. Mansfield.
Here.
Mr. Miller.
Here.
Reverend Walker.
Present. At this time, leading us in our Pledge of Allegiance, I didn't have to twist her arm, or she graciously accepted this awesome responsibility. Julie Fry, our curator, my neighbor of Stan Hewitt, and she'll come and lead us in our Pledge of Allegiance. You can come all the way up to the...
Okay. I pledge
allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
And if you just stand right there.
Oh, gosh, okay.
I do get the pleasure of taking a picture.
Oh, okay, sure.
Ready? 1, 2, 3, one more.
Yeah, thank you.
You're welcome.
At this time, any community and reflections from board members? Community school reflections? Yes.
I'll start. Did a lot in the last couple of weeks, but I wanted to focus on the Council of Urban Boards of Education conference that most of us attended. And just a couple highlights, and this is just from day one, just to show you what happens at the conference. But the first session I went to was called Creating Trauma-Informed and Culturally Competent Schools. And the presenter, Dr. Melissa Sadin, has 4 tenets that she thinks school systems should follow. And number 1 and number 2, I think everybody follows. Number 1 is realize the prevalence of trauma and recognize the impact of trauma on development. I think everybody realizes that. I think 3 and 4 is where most school systems need to start trying a little harder on these kind of things. And number 3 was the system responds in a trauma-informed way. And number 4, resists re-traumatization. So that was just a highlight of that breakout session. These breakout sessions are hour and 15 minutes or hour and a half apiece. So just a little tidbit from that one. That very same day, I went to one called Understanding Data to Impact Student Outcomes. And they talked a lot about data, but there's actually some non-data things that came out of that that really impressed me with this school district, and it was how they recruit teachers of color. The district has roughly 80% of their teachers are not white, and 1/3 of all teachers are male. And I think about how we struggle as a school system to try to get black males into the school in teaching and people of color in particular into teaching. And I thought one thing that was very interesting, now the school district's very proud of what they do from a sports standpoint. It was a district of 7,000, so not quite the size, not half the size of ours, but they said one of their greatest recruitment tools is the success of their sports program in attracting black male teachers. And I guess that's from a supplemental contract standpoint. They love to coach. I guess that's the takeaway from that, but those were some interesting things that came out of that one. There were some other ones that I talked to the superintendent and the CEO about, and David and I were actually texting during the one about the size and the size of the district and their budget and things of that nature. And another one I went to that day was using equity policy to increase instructional time for all. And they asked, are school boards effective? And this particular school board, it was Robbinsdale School District, and I forget what state they're from now, but they did a self-assessment of their board, and they said they were brutally honest about assessing themselves. And they were asking if they are really a good board or just good for some of the stakeholders. I thought that was an interesting question. And they also talked about their equity policy, but they went a step further talking about having an equity plan. It's not just good enough to have an equity policy, but you have to have a plan, and that plan should sort of coexist with your strategic plan. And if you're not doing that, I guess you ask yourself, is our equity policy really working? So, and once again, that was day one, and 3 of the 4 that I went to. So very good conference once again this year.
I'm just going to add just a little bit because Tim talked about trauma-informed. There were a couple of sessions that were dealing with trauma-informed and talking about trauma-informed in the classroom. And one of the things that stood out in one of the sessions for me was, and I see this happen, I have a guy that I work with who does this all the time, is they talk about people doodling and kids doodling and how sometimes some of the teachers stop kids from doodling and doing these things, but just because the kid is doodling doesn't mean that they're not paying attention. And sometimes you have to let that go, but then some teachers, how they look at that as a problem, kids, they feel they're not paying attention to what they're teaching. And I thought that was real interesting. And there was another one that Elisa and I were in, we talked about trauma-informed. There was a panel, and there was a young man from, was it Sandy Hook, or I can't think of what school district he was from, but he was
Close by.
he was there, and there was a parent, and they had a state representative and a mental health person, and they talked about mental health and how so much trauma is going on all the time, and are our teachers informed of the trauma that goes on in the courtroom? Have they had the training? Have they understand what trauma is? They understand about the sensitivity of some things that go on in the classroom that can trigger some of the things that happen with kids in the classroom. So it was really interesting to listen to what they were saying. But there was also one that, Lisa, you'll love this here, on the arts. And there was a school district in Arizona who uses the arts. And they talked about how the arts, how effective it is in learning and education. And it was very interesting. And a lot of the sessions, and there were a couple that Tim and I were in together, and I think the superintendent and I were in another one together, and maybe Reverend was in another one. But it was interesting how there were some things that we already do, which is good, we're ahead of the game, but there's some things that we still have to catch up on. And not just us, but there are a lot of school districts across the country that need to catch up. And then going to the equity policy as well. We have the equity policy, and I just didn't want us to have an equity policy just to have a policy, because that's not what we need. But the equity policy has to have some meat. And so, and I was thinking about this here, been thinking about this for the last several months, but I thought about Ms. Sibley, Carla Chapman, who I was going to talk to, because I want to see where we're at, and even what bite do we have, and how is it working as far as equity, because there were a couple of sessions too where they talked about equity, and they talked about what they did for the students and the teachers in that district in order to move the district forward. Talk about academics, they talked about student achievement, they talked about graduation, they talked about performance in the classroom. So all that stuff hit around some of those things, and they made sure that, and it was reading your school district in Pennsylvania, and they were really good. They did a presentation, the superintendent was there, on how they deal with some of the things in equity, and even how it spreads out into the school, and how the school has the students involved with part of equity that goes on in the school, as well as the teachers and the administrative staff. So it was very interesting when it came to some of that. But those are the 2 things that stood out to me the most, and I didn't want to take up a whole lot of time, but Tim had brought that up, and I thought it's a good time just to talk about those things, because we need to continue to work on the things that we're doing and continue to move forward so our students can move forward and the district can move forward. Thank you.
I'm going to jump in, first of all, to thank you. Anytime anyone at this table says arts and relates me to that, I love that. It means I've done my job the last 9 years, or 10 years. It is forever. It was a fantastic conference. I did get to go on a site visit. That was one thing I got to do that was unique. I did get to go see their version of college and career academies in Miami-Dade at one school. Interesting, they don't have lockers in Miami. The kids were like, no, nobody has lockers. I was like, really? No lockers at all? So strange. And the hallways are outside, kind of like what we always see in movies, like in California and places. And so I'd never seen a high school that was set up quite that way. So all those are outside, and then the rooms are air conditioned inside. So it was interesting to see that setup. This was 100% African American and Latino school, basically had been turned into a career hub. They're under the National Academy Foundation. NAF is who they're under, rather than Ford NGL like we are. And it was a very interesting, some real interesting differences, but it was good to see some of the things that really work. They don't do a whole lot during the school year except for that one class per day that is part of their schedule. But they do have all summer, they have paid internships with community partners. So the students work in their field all summer long. The only complication with that was they don't have transportation for the kids to get to the students to get to their jobs. So that paid internship, probably a lot of that goes just to get you where you need to go. Miami-Dade is a huge county. But they had made huge progress in their graduation rate. I believe that it was honestly, I think it was as abysmal as 36% when they first started out with this particular high school. And they had taken the students, and they were approaching the 70% mark. So in about a 10-year span. So it was a huge jump. So kudos to them for that. I think that we've made the right choices. I think that we've done, we took Fort NGL and we've made it the Akron way, which I love. So, but it was fantastic to see. One of the things that I know that we do that I really appreciate is some of the jobs that I got to see were not going to be ones that would have sustained you here in Akron at a high, a very high rate of pay. A lot of they had LPNs, but I asked the question, how many of you plan to go on from your LPN, because they weren't going to graduate with that certification. They were going to be close. How many of you plan to go on to be nurse practitioners or RNs? And there were a few. So I don't want those students to sell themselves short. I want them to be able to go higher. Just a few other highlights from the days, just because I don't want to take up too much time. I did get to go to several that were about immigration and refugee and immigration status, and making sure that we are in compliance with that. And there's a few things I'm going to be just following up on, just to make sure I know the answers to. And a really interesting one on trying to make classrooms as gender positive as possible, so that whatever students identify as, whether biological or their identification, that they feel welcomed, and that a family is a family based on, it's just a place where you're loved. That's what family is, rather than, it's hard to do a family tree if you are a non-traditional family. It can be hard to have a Mother's Day celebration. So making sure that it's about bringing someone who cares about you versus putting a label on something. Things that I'd never thought of, which I'm sure our teachers are way ahead of this than I am, but not having students line up by boys and girls lines necessarily, because you might put a student in a really awkward position to make a choice that they're not ready to make public to everyone. So really, really interesting on that. So, and one of the most fascinating things was the person I connected with most the first day was actually a Native American from Wyoming. And he was from an incredibly small reservation school. And I said to him, what's the obvious question? What is someone from this tiny school district in the middle of Wyoming, which Wyoming, by the way, has the population of Summit County in the whole state. So just to give you reference. What do you have to do with Cube? To me, that's not urban. And he said, you'd be amazed how much we have in common. And we spent a little time having conversations, and we really do. We have a lot in common with the isolation and the segregation and things like that, and lack of opportunities. So unless they create it. So just all around, Cube is always the best and most informative. Also got a book that I'm going to let y'all borrow from one of the speakers, Christian Moore. He was like the Energizer Bunny. So I've got that, and I promise to pass that around as I get finished. And I'll shut up now.
Any other comments? Any other experiences that we want to relate? Yes.
Sure, I'll just mention a couple things real quick. I got a chance to go to an On the Table conversation at Asia Inc. It was fantastic. The table was one of the more diverse tables that I think I've ever sat at in Akron. It was amazing, and lots of people brought food to share with the rest of the table, so even just that experience alone without conversation was great. But we talked a lot about refugees and how we educate those populations in our community, and someone had this amazing idea. They're like, we need these small symbols of reminders in our community that we're not just English speakers in Akron. So like, go to these places of power like the school board and say welcome in a couple different languages, and these like very small acts to remind us all that we are not just English speakers here. So I thought that was it was a fantastic table, but a couple little nuggets of interesting things as well. And also, the Ellet's new field dedication was amazing. Thank you so much to the Haslam family and the Cleveland Browns. Miles Garrett spent so much time with the kids. I thought that was amazing. At one point, he had everyone circled around her, and he says, "Dog check." And the kids just kind of looked at him like, "What do we do now?" And he's like, "You bark. This is when you bark." It's adorable. And I was telling this story to my husband when I got home, who's a big high school football guy. He's like, like that's really cool, but North broke a pretty giant record over the weekend. It broke a 47-loss streak, so congratulations to North. And then finally, just wanted to mention the Robinson CLC Family Resource Dedication. What a cool space. And it's so accessible to the community as well. It's right there on the first floor when you walk in. Really exciting about what that could mean from health and human services perspective, but also from like an education enrichment. So thank you for everyone who was involved in that.
I just want to talk to you about on the table. I attended one at the courthouse, and it was just by chance. Most people at that table were talking about children. They were talking about diversity. They were talking about how do we establish that? How do we integrate and learn about each other? So if you're from a predominantly white neighborhood, going over and integrating with a black neighborhood. Some of the black children's going over to integrate with like white families and things like that. So they were tossing that around and how that could be achieved and giving some ideas of that to try to help, each person or each ethnicity learn about another ethnicity so they don't make judgments or just listen to what other people are saying. They have a firsthand experience with that group of people and a better understanding of how, they respond to different things or, their norms and their their people groups. So that was an interesting conversation, and it was, I just thought it was just really great to hear people say that, people that I just met right then and there, and they had these ideas and they were talking about our children and how we can help enculturate our society by integrating families of all ethnicities and learning about each other rather than just, making assumptions based on whatever we hear in our own environment, so.
Thank you very much. Just want to highlight again, CUBE. There are many, many facets of CUBE. In fact, I was talking with a board member from Wisconsin today because of our interaction and relationship at CUBE, and they were interested in equity, interested in our parent engagement, and I was talking to Carla Sibley, just a second ago about that. How can we continue to pass that information? Is it something on our website somebody can click on and get some tidbits about that, information about that? And then the Northeast Regional OSBA, we got a certificate for our Firestone cheerleaders who will be making a presentation at the OSBA annual conference in Columbus. And again, the Robinson CLC, it is so important to have these resource centers. And talking with school teachers in the Cleveland area, and trying to find resources for students who are poor or who are neglected or are abused or who come to school ill-prepared with clothing, hair not combed properly, no shoes. When we have in our community resource centers where we partner with United Way and the number I think is 211, and you get a whole list of resources that a parent And in this particular resource at Robinson, a parent could come during the day and some early evenings. They can deal with finance. They could deal with how to do a number of things to help their families. Then there are resources available for them that they would not otherwise have. So we are blessed in our community to not only have that at the I Promise School, but in East and down in Robinson, and then we hope to go over to Helen Arnold, and then hopefully something on the west side. So that we can continue to spread the wealth around, so all of our communities can be blessed and benefited by this resource in partnership, again, with United Way, one of our outstanding partners. And then, of course, was already highlighted about the dedication of the Ellett football field, the turf, and of course, Miles Garrett and many of our board members who were present. What a wonderful night. It was cold, but it was a good night and a good win for Ellett and North High School. So we're grateful for that. One of the meetings I attended at CUBE, and these are questions because we have persons in our community who are immigrants. Do we have a home language survey? No one needs to answer right now, but just keep those in mind. Are we in compliance with Title VI of the Civil Rights Act of 1964? Do we have, and we shouldn't, a resident requirement? What is the response if ICE comes to any of our schools? What's the policy? Do we have a 287 agreement with the local enforcement areas in our community? Those are important because we are about protecting our children. Our children all should be in what they call a safe environment. Our schools should be in a safe environment, and none of our students need to feel that someone is going to come from the outside and disrupt their life because they or their parents are from someplace different than here. They have a right to public education, and we are sensitive locations. So those are things I know Ms. Lisa was saying she's going to highlight on, but I just wanted to throw them out so at least we can begin to talk about that, because that issue is going to become even more important as the days go by as to what our policies and what our positions are as regards to that segment of our general population. Right?
I just wanted to
Yes.
add, you were the last night of the CUBE conference, that gentleman, the Mexican guy who was former military,
Right.
his message was so phenomenal about the history of Mexicans and just people. I mean, it's like we have lost that. We have lost the education about the diverse, people in the United States and even beyond that. And what, our history is it's not even taught anymore. And that, it kind of, I know that, and I've always thought about that and figured that someday that it would be incorporated back into the curriculum. But it's just fascinating because there's so much misinformation being communicated, and the authenticity and the real facts of what's really going on and have gone on that have shaped the way that people have responded over the years towards other ethnicities, and if they had the proper information and were taught or learned it, it would be totally different. It's just like, I have it on my phone, but I can't look at it. I can't bring it up right now, and I just was ill prepared, and it just hit me. It was just fascinating. I have never learned so much in one sitting about the United States, about, some of the rights of the Mexicans and how they had a pact or a treaty with the United States that they were going to they would be okay. And, you know, and now our country and the wall and the, you know, the immigration things that are going on that shouldn't be going on, because there was an agreement that they would have their land and be able to live the way that they lived without being hindered. It was so much, I couldn't even take it all in, and I can't really properly dispense it to even tell you guys. But it was fascinating and so enlightening, and I just think, you know, we should find some way to revisit history. I think a lot of people want to know about other ethnicities and how, you know, they arrived where they are, and, you know, how things kind of like unfolded as they traveled a path through the United States of America, and the history, you know, of how we came to be where we are today. So I can't even utter it, but, you know.
Thank you. And then quickly, when Bruce mentioned about doodling, one of the sessions said, our attention, our listening ability increases when we're coloring. So they handed out paper that had, you know, you can color. They gave us coloring instruments to color, and that increases your listening. So maybe we may need to try that out at a board meeting, but to increase our listening skills. And then for trauma, there were little items, little fuzzy little sticks and other items that relieves some of that pressure where someone might be in a traumatic situation just by using those things, touching those things, doing certain things would lower that tension. And therefore you would have control of the situation versus the situation becoming out of control. All right, thank you. At this time, we have a request to address the board by the ADM board. And if the ADM board representative is present, we would ask that you would stand at the podium. And because of our technology and we want to record, make sure you speak into the mic that is there. And there's also, Mike, if you feel that you are like some of us and you need to move, you may want to take that handheld mic.
Oh, yeah.
It's up to you.
You want to preach?
Good evening. My name's Jerry Craig, and I'm the Executive Director of the County of Summit Alcohol, Drug Addiction, and Mental Health Services Board, and we're probably more affectionately known as the ADM Board. And I'm here to talk to you a little bit tonight about issue 14, which is the renewal of our property tax levy. We've enjoyed the support of our community in supporting mental health services and addiction treatment services in Summit County probably since I've been in the system over 30 years. And as the years have gone by, the ADM board's local levy really makes up about 78% of our total funding. And that gives us probably maximum flexibility locally to be able to address community needs as they exist here in Summit County. Certainly a lot of our programs and services are funded through Medicaid, but there's a huge number of services that Medicaid does not cover, and this is where our funding comes in. The other part of it is that we get some state funding and some federal funding, but usually those are targeted for specific purposes and typically will only last for a certain number of years. So our levy allows us to continue programs that are working in our community. The ADM board funds services and supports, including prevention, education, treatment services for people that don't have any insurance coverage, whether they don't qualify for insurance through Medicaid, or they are underinsured through their private insurance company. So we are sort of the safety net for those individuals. And then we provide funding for support services like housing, employment and educational support, and also for peer support. Peer support workers are really kind of a relatively new initiative that our board has supported, and that is taking people who are further along in their recovery, pairing them with somebody who's relatively new in their recovery, and then helping them make that recovery journey. And what that really does is it instills a sense of hope in people who are really struggling in their newfound recovery, to know that I was where you were at one time. I felt the way you're feeling, and I'm here to tell you that there's hope for you, and there's a future for you. In the handout that I gave to you, there are a number of programs that we fund in Akron Public Schools. We fund the Eye Care Mentoring Program through United Way. We also fund a large segment of the PACS Good Behavior Game. I don't know why I forgot the PACS Good Behavior Game. And, we have over 200 teachers who are trained in the PACS program. And, we're delighted to know that the Akron Public Schools have seen such a value in this that you've gotten a grant to continue to make sure that permeates even more of the schools. It's really a promising program. So our services really are, about building a fence upstream and helping to prepare young people in order to be successful learners, to address those risk and protective factors. But it's also to be the safety net in funding so that we're catching people at the bottom of the waterfall. But we need to make sure that we focus on both things, and that's really what the ADM board is all about. 94% of the funding that we put in place goes to community contracts with our providers. We have over 30 providers across the community. I was interested in hearing about Asia Services in Action. We fund prevention programs through Asia Services. So, a lot of the things that we're talking about and the things that the ADM board does is to address trauma, to address cultural competency in our clinicians and some of the other things. So as you look at the 6% that goes towards our administrative costs really go not only towards staffing, but also towards initiatives that improve the provider network and make them a little bit more prepared to address the needs that are in front of them. Right now, the cost of our levy is pretty nominal. It's $7 a month for the owner of a $100,000 home. That's about the cost of a Starbucks coffee if you drink the expensive kind. But that's only one cup a month, right? So if you're drinking Starbucks coffee every day, you're more than spending So I think that that's really a good investment in our community, especially to provide that safety net of services. So we're very appreciative of the community support for the ADM board, and we just would like to express our appreciation to the Akron School Board and the Akron Public Schools under Dr. James for partnering with us and being good partners, because all the work that we do is in the community with our community partners, and we can't do this work alone. So I just want to say thank you for that.
Thank you very much.
Anybody have
Yes.
questions?
No, and I noticed on here, this is not a renewal tax, not a renewal. I mean, this is a renewal, not a new tax. Is that correct?
That's correct. We originally funded this levy in 2007. This is our second renewal of this levy, so it won't be an additional tax.
Right, okay. I thought that was just important, so people who are listening can
Thank you.
hear and understand that, so they don't.
Sometimes I miss some of my
okay.
talking points.
You got your back, Jerry.
Appreciate that.
Thank you, yes.
I just wanted to give a shout out for the PACS Good Behavior Game. I did get to visit a PACS classroom last year at Jerry's urging, and I would recommend, if any board members haven't had a chance to do that, I hadn't in the past, I would recommend taking a look at the positive experience and how encouraging the students are to each other, let alone how their behavior is, but just the encouragement. And to me, it's really has an anti-bullying quality because there's so much affirmation in the classroom. So just a huge thanks to you for that experience, but to ADM for providing that for the district. Thank you.
Any other expressions, board members? At this time, we have a resolution endorsing the ADM board, and I need a motion.
So move.
Second.
Been properly moved and seconded. Any questions or comments? Roll call.
Mr. Miller,
Yes.
Reverend Walker,
Yes.
Mr. Alexander.
Yes.
Mrs. Baylor,
Yes.
Mr. Bravo,
Yes.
Mrs. Lasher,
Yes.
Mrs. Mansfield.
Yes.
And we thank you very much.
Thank you, and much appreciated.
And at this time, we have the official document for you. You can take a copy of Mr. Pendleton has it for you. Under communications, we have a presentation from our elementary essential experience.
So we're going to introduce that from.
Lisa and
We're-
Ginger
'cause
will
we're so
introduce
shy,
it.
apparently.
Thank
Go
you.
ahead, Ginger.
The Elementary Essential Experiences is a $1.2 million commitment from GAR Foundation over the next 3 years that provides preschool and first through fifth grade students at Akron Public Schools with a very meaningful field study outside of the classroom.
We are really excited about this. When we heard
Yes.
about this first in our committee and couldn't wait for it to come to fruition. So students will visit 6 local cultural and historical organizations to participate in custom design educational programming directly connected to classroom learning. Each school year, approximately 9,000 students will participate in the experiences, deepening connections to our community, building a skill set through inquiry, and gaining exposure to career possibilities.
APS brings to this partnership a deep understanding of standards-based instruction, commitment to the personalizing education to reach all students, and the infrastructure to launch and sustain the work.
Please welcome Marcy Ebright, a digital learning specialist, to report out on our essential experiences. There she is.
I'm here. All right, thank you very much. I've been lucky enough the last 9 months to be able to be a small part of all of this. And I'm going to tell you tonight the story of the essential experiences, but I want you to keep in mind that this is just one chapter in a very large book of stories that we have going on with Akron Public Schools. We had, field experiences outside the classroom in elementary going on for years. The kindergarten planetarium has not gone away. It's still there. These are brand new experiences being brought on this year. As well as you look at the college and career academies under this umbrella of all of this work, the experiential learning that's going on, the field trips are happening for our high school students, where they're getting a chance to go out into the community, college visits, and all that great stuff. So this is one story in all this great big pieces of parts that we have going on with Akron Public Schools. You do have a red folder that was on your table when you came in. It has all kinds of goodies inside of it for you to investigate and dig into. There's some surprises later as you go through some of those that you might find. But there's also a website up on the screen and the presentations in your folder that has sort of a landing page where all the communication about essential experiences is happening. So you're welcome to check that out as I'm talking. The essential experiences really thread through all of our work at Akron Public Schools. In elementary schools, there's a lot of attention that's been paid to focus areas 1 and 2, which is all that differentiated learning, high-quality instruction, and those learning conditions for our students. And this, with the essential experiences, really gave us an opportunity to look at focus area 3, maximizing those partnerships and opportunities to support student success. So once upon a time, that's how all good stories start, right? Or a couple years ago, Dr. James had a vision where we could create common experiences for all of our students, not based on individual factors like what school you attend or what classroom you may have, or if your teacher was able to find funding to take you on a trip this year. The vision was to create a comprehensive field study program for all kids and with equity across all buildings, to burst open the walls of education and push inquiry-based learning for all learners. One year later, GAR Foundation approached APS about doing school visits to local arts and cultural organizations and to do them differently than we have, or see them differently than we have in the past. So the two great ideas converged and the essential experiences were born. With this big lift from GAR Foundation, along with Dr. James and Dr. McWilliams-Woods, it was time to move forward and plan. A challenge was issued to curriculum departments and under the leadership of Karen Gijic to think large scale and share suggestions of existing and dream partnerships that would support the college and career classroom connections, curriculum, and technologies. And throughout, GAR Foundation and APS content specialists communicated until the list was narrowed. at the State of the Schools address this past February, Dr. Jacobs announced, along with GAR Foundation's Kirsten Toth, the essential experiences and named these partners. GAR Foundation's considerable contribution with the essential experiences fits our APS model, giving students more real-life experiences and real connections. I'd like to recognize those present from these partner organizations in the room with us here tonight. If they could stand as I say their name. These are educators and coordinators from each of the organizations that have worked with me tirelessly the past year as we've worked through some of these. Toivo Mater from Stan Hewitt. Thank you. Julie Fry from Stan Hewitt. Autumn Russell from the Akron Zoo. Reggie Lynch from the Akron Art Museum. Kara Stewart from Art Sparks. And Jason Klein from Hale Farm and Village. Thank you for being here tonight. Once those partners were named, now we had to really get to some work. And one of those pieces was the work under Mary Otley with the elementary tactical team. This tactical team consisted of teachers, administrators, coaches, and they met throughout this last spring to discuss transformation in the elementary schools. With a charge from Dr. McWilliams prompted them to explore deepening our community connections, expand opportunities for inquiry, and improve access for elementary student leadership. The tactical team reviewed the progress and goals of each of the essential experiences and leveraged them to push transformation in their work. Then, in March and April, we thought it'd be a great idea to try out some of these experiences and some of the content that was starting to come together. It was sort of still in draft form, so we found some guinea pig students to go out to these locations. And these are them actually out there doing this work. And the actual cover pages that you see across the front are our students doing the experiences at each location. I'm going to have you listen to this because I'm going to preface what it is for a second. A group of students from Harris-Jackson had their first opportunity to get on a charter bus as they went up to the Cleveland Museum of Natural History. We got on a pretty nice charter bus. It has nice plush seats. It had a bathroom inside, so it was very exciting. And you can't see it because the video was like cell phone quality, but I want you to hopefully hear it. Well, they were a little excited. They were just getting on the bus. Pretty exciting for them to go up there. After each of these experiences were concluded, the teachers gave their sort of feedback to us. The providers went in, then gave feedback, and it really gave us a chance to see where we could improve the process for students as they went on site and on these visits. And afterwards, with those results in May, the partners had a chance to come together as a cohort under the leadership of Kirsten Toth, Senior Vice President of GAR Foundation. They reviewed the preliminary evaluations of the pilot experiences. All the partners were able to hear from Daniel Jude, who's a diversity and inclusion speaker. He discussed the power of inclusion in these experiences, and most importantly, set the challenge that students should be able to see themselves in each of the partners' organizations. Afterwards, the cohort had a meaningful discussion around how they can use this knowledge to make space for our students and get prepared to be invaded by about 1,700 of our kids at each of their places. Also, in July, the College and Career Academies of Akron Steering Committee had a focus elementary group that met, and this was the first time the Business Advisory Group spent time really exploring what college and career academies might look like in the elementary schools, and they provided us guidance. The essential experiences were shared and discussed with this group as well. They noted that inquiry, including leadership at all levels, and the importance of collaboration were key factors that elementary schools have and are the foundation of any work moving forward. We've had some impacts on our internal processes. When you think about all of these kids, 9,000 kids in the elementary, in addition to district trips that we already had going on, and then adding in all the high school trips that were coming online, we really needed the time to sort of stop and regroup and think about how we were moving kids around this district. And so there was some impact on how we do business. And one of them, well, for me anyhow, was the site that you had at the beginning, which really sort of helps schedule and communicate everything that's going on with the Essential Experience. The intent is to avoid a bunch of emails and documents and everything going out to teachers all the time, that they have one place that they can go to. And as we sort of grew in that a little bit, let me scroll down here a little. So all of their teacher manuals are posted here for them, so they can reach them digitally and be able to get any of the hyperlinks that are embedded. And there's also a tab for the essential dates. And this really helps for organization of when they're traveling, who's traveling, when the different parts are coming in, and all that. I wanted to scroll at the bottom to show you. A lovely little table, so if you're ever interested in jumping on one of the field trips, you can actually come on down and say you want to go and see, the art museum trip. You can see all the different art museum trips and the days that they're going and what schools are attending. We wrapped in the other elementary trips in here as well, just so it would be less confusing for teachers and schools. They had one place to go and look for all of their K-5 trips. We also worked closely with the transportation department to make all of those trips happen and sort of prioritize all the different types of trips that are going on in our district, things that are federally and state mandated that we knew we had to do. And then looking at our essential college and career academy trips in the elementaries and the high schools, and then looking at any other district level trips we have going on and classroom trips. And all this communication really helped make sure that kids could get fed when they had to get to different places, that they got there on time, and that we've been trying to work through making sure that everybody's getting what they need. Children's Hospital is aware of kids who may have medical needs when all the trips are happening, so that they can prepare medical baskets for kids, send along staff if it's needed for a student that's going on a trip that might need insulin. So they are able to see all of that and have access to all of that K-5 information too. That way of communicating. So what we've done after all this sort of work is we think we've created in this part of the story something that's unique and new. It's a one-of-a-kind essential experience customized with students in mind. We're able to say that the materials are up and ready. As you can see, the 6 signs here across the front, but briefly, the essential experience for pre-K comes from Art Sparks, where they're doing a program called Ready Spark Kindergarten. And in this one, they spend time with 15 weeks. They come into our pre-K classrooms and dance and sing with students and get them to move with some of those essential skills that we want kids to have as they head into kindergarten, like how to read a book, how to skip count, how to tell your colors. And they do that to song and dance. I skipped around here. So we got the second one is second grade, so I put them in the wrong order. The second one is Cleveland Museum of Natural History. They're doing a program called Fossils to Fur. It's actually a 2-parter. The first part, they bring the kiddos into the classroom. The museum staff comes down and the kids do a dino dig right in the classroom, where they do an archaeological dig. They find what fossils they're looking at. They record their observations. And then the second part, they actually get on the bus, which you heard their excitement for that. And they head up to Cleveland and they get to see those dinosaurs and fossilized bones in person and make comparisons to living counterparts. The first grade experience is another 2-parter experience where the Akron Zoomobile comes into the classroom, where the kids get to see living and non-living things and discuss those. They bring in birds and turtles and kinkajou, which was a new animal that I learned about. And then the students get the chance then to travel to the zoo, where they have a guided tour experience. This isn't just go to the zoo and walk around. They've created a unique experience that's fantastic. The students have, I think, 5 stations. Autumn, am I right? 5 stations that they go to, each one of them focusing on those different parts of habitats and what support living things in them. And they get to make things along the way and learn stuff, and then they enjoy that entire experience there. The essential experience for Hale Farm is all about goods and services and what it takes to make producers and consumers and to make a market thrive. So the pre-materials that students have before they go really delve into this period of time and what needed to happen for a market to thrive. They go on site and hear about entrepreneurs and businesses and marketing and advertising and how our market makes a community strong. And then when they come back, they look at how the modern day markets are affecting them. They also get to hear, those aren't made yet, they should be live soon, a set of local entrepreneurs like Akron Honey is being filmed for our kids to show them what a modern day entrepreneur looks like. So the great thing about all these experiences, they really dedicated time to our kids. Hale Farm is practically closed for just our students when they come on site. They get the whole Hale Farm and Village to themselves. The Akron Art Museum is like I said early, so we get the Art Museum to ourselves as well too. In your book, they've created for our students a graphic novel in which a character named Drew gets locked in the museum after he's been naughty on a field trip and didn't pay attention to his teacher. And in order to be saved, he has to go and talk to the different artwork for clues on how to get out of there. So the kids love it. They melt right into this one as they walk around and read the different clues in their graphic novel, learn about the artwork at the same time, and each station has a hands-on experience while they're there. And then finally, Stan Hewitt is bringing us Akron, the City of Opportunity. Mrs. Baylor, this is probably one that you'd really enjoy because it's all talking about migration, immigration, what's the story of people as they came to Akron in the 1910s and 20s, and what's the modern day story of why people are still coming to Akron and building our community. So robust experience for our kids across all of those. So one of the things we talked about was making sure that our staff really knew what was happening, because we found in the pilot the staff came in and they kind of stood back and they were just enjoying the tour like the kids were. But we really needed them to sort of buy into it and understand what was going on. So we offered 6-hour options this fall. We had about 150 teachers that came through. They actually got on a bus. I got some pictures of them. They got on a bus, and the partners allowed me to bring them out on site to their locations, except for Cleveland. They actually did a webinar here. So you can see some of the pictures of them on site. The teachers in the top right corner at the Akron Art Museum are striking a swan pose, if you want to know what's going on there. And we can see our teachers in the bottom left corner learning about the basics of economics from, what's his name? Jim. But it's a store, right? It's your store. Okay, it's their general store, and he's teaching them that. So they got a chance to really see and walk through in a miniature version what the kids were going to do. On the bus over, we covered the pre-materials. They got there on site. They were able to see it. And on the bus back, we did the post-materials. And then they went home, and they felt like they had a good sense about what was happening. I'm going to show you just a little clip of the webinar so you can get a sense of what kids would see when they go to the Cleveland trip.
To get into this room, just around the corner here. Whoa, you can see all the dinosaur fossils, and usually this is a really exciting moment for the class because we call ourselves a dinosaur museum sometimes to help explain where we are because of this room. So we've got some dinosaurs on display and some other prehistoric animals too. We're not just talking about dinosaurs at this stop. The students are tasked with matching some examples of prehistoric animals. We've got a mastodon, a T-Rex, this Dunkleosteus, which we saw that example of the jaw from earlier at the touch table, Glyptodon, and an ammonite. And they're matching those to animals that are still alive today. So we have 3 main stops that we take in this space. And I'll kind of point out where they are. We won't do the full stops, of course, because I want to save time for you to see what the classroom visit portion of your experience looks like too. But one of our stops is over here in the Ice Age corner, where we have that Glyptodon and a mastodon skull, plus a diorama of what life might have looked like in the Ice Age. These animals did not live on the glaciers that were in Ohio. They lived in the land nearby, even though much of the state was covered by ice. they still want to pass through it.
Go ahead and pause that. So teachers were able to see this webinar, they were able to ask questions back and forth, simple things like where do we park, where do the kids' coats go, where are they gonna have lunch, things they were really concerned about, because taking kids all the way to Cleveland is a little nerve-wracking for some of them, but they felt a lot better once they saw where they were gonna go. And all the teachers expressed that they were so glad that they came because they really got a sense for what they could get kids ready for and what they would be able to experience with them. So that means we're live. So in September, Art Spark started in our pre-K classroom. So they started almost a week right after school came on. And as of October 1st, we've been sending kids out into the world on these trips. We did have Dino Detectives and the Zoomobile in the classroom starting in September because we need them to get in first before we can actually send them out to locations. So these are going on live, and teachers are taking their kids and letting me know when things don't work and when things work. So it's going really well. So beyond today, we're going to continue being evaluative. We're going to continue asking what's going on. We're continuing to observe and see where we can make improvements. And where we would like to really incorporate some fine arts integration. We have it in all of them. All of them have this ability for fine arts, and we've highlighted them inside that in the Akron Art Museum, obviously. But we have a group of fine arts teachers that are in the elementary. They're looking for how they can carry it back to their classroom and also support the classroom teacher with arts integration. So that's one step we're sort of working on. And looking at potential expansion and where we can just sort of grow and continue to refine these as teachers and students experience them and tell us what they would have liked to see more of. We can make sure that we're incorporating those things and continue to work with this fabulous cohort of people to make sure those things are happening. So, the story of the Essential Experience, it doesn't really have an end. It's an endless beginning through the power of just really fantastic partnerships and fantastic ideas. Okay, do we have any questions?
Any questions, board members? To our presenter or to our guests?
I just have a comment. I mean, I'm in Leadership Akron class now. We went to the zoo.
Oh, that's why you like.
I am going back to the zoo. And there was so much there to learn. I mean,
It is.
from the time I had gone with my daughter, she was a teenager, she's an adult, to now, it is so much there to learn. And I'm sure in all the areas, a lot of places, I'm gonna be attending all these places to see what's going on, because it's a lot going on here in Akron, and education-wise, it's good for our students to learn as well. 'Cause me as most of my life is almost over with, starting to see some of these things and notice, but I mean, it's amazing. It'd be good for our kids to actually see this and grow and learn with it. So I'm glad to see this happening.
Each of them really worked hard to create completely new. When I say it's new, they rewrote, they dusted off some things that they had, they kept the best of those, and then they just dug in and rewrote and let us keep pushing at them, making sure they included career and college academies, those soft skills we wanted to see, technologies throughout it, arts integration. I mean, they just really dug into all facets of it to give this is brand new stuff.
Patrick and then Lisa.
I just want to pick up on that, I guess. Hopefully this is picking me up. But you know what I love behind this program really is the intentionality. So, thank you to Dr. James and to Marcy and the staff, our partners. I love the intentionality of focusing on the things that kids really do need exposure to and might not otherwise get or have the opportunity to have exposure to. But the fact that, those things, you see those things in a lot of districts, but it's when those opportunities come along, sometimes it's every year, sometimes it's not, sometimes it's the same thing, sometimes it's not. I love the intentionality behind this program. I love that it's programmed from pre-K on up. It's really fantastic, and this is very well put together. I might like to attend one of these just to
These
see.
do.
I'd love to see what
They're so good. We'll
what
take
they
a lot of
get.
pictures.
That's great. Thank you. Thank you.
So one of the pieces that I love about this is the equity piece. I hate this Marcy bit. I got to talk into my mic, so I'm sorry.
That's okay.
But I love that. So it doesn't matter what zip code you're born in. It doesn't matter which school you go to. It doesn't matter if you have mobility, right? So if you're starting at one school in second grade and some in fourth grade, you move somewhere else, you have that same experience with your new classmates. Do you remember, when they start talking about, remember that time we went to the zoo, or remember that time we went to Stan Hewitt, you can join in and say, oh yeah, I went there too. And so that link that it gives them, to be able to connect immediately with their new classmates. I remember as far as an Akron Public School student, I remember the day I went to the planetarium. I remember the day I went to the Old Stone School, and I can sit here and I can talk to Bruce or Tim, and they had those same experiences, even though we didn't go to school at the same places at the same time. The only question I had, now that I've praised you, is I know we've taken this into consideration. I know this is handled. I just want to hear maybe how are we doing with those pieces with students with disabilities or students with a different language barrier? How are we? I know these institutions are ready for that. So can you just talk a little bit about how we're dealing with that?
So all of our MD and AU students are coming on board with this. One of the ways, initially we thought, well, if you're a second grader in an MD classroom, you'll go with the second grade trip. And that seemed like a nightmare after a while. So what we're doing is the K-1-2 go on all the K once they go to the planetarium, the Akron Zoo, and Cleveland. And then your 3-4-5 classrooms as a unit are going to the 3-4-5 essential experiences. So that's helped us say, okay, we can wrap around this MD classroom. We talked with Stan Hewitt because obviously it's a manor house. And so if kids are coming with disabilities, how are we going to make sure we get around there? And I'll let Julie, you want to speak to how we wound up handling that?
You're going to have to have the mic.
You're going to have to get up, Julie, sorry.
FaceTime. So yeah, it's Tanny Hewitt. We made sure that, is this on? No. Wait a second.
Should be a little button right there. Okay.
Now it's on. We made sure that the spaces that they use, at previous years, programs that we've had for fourth grade students that came to Stan Hewitt, they would do almost a full house tour. They do first and second floor, and we are not handicap accessible. So for this, we knew that wasn't an option. We had to make sure we were fully accessible. So they're only going to rooms that everyone can access. So they're going to 2 rooms in the basement level and 2 rooms on the first floor. And we can move anyone with accessibility issues easily around to get to all of those spaces. Was that the right answer?
That's perfect. So we purposely picked out places that we knew would be okay. And the same thing with Hale Farm. There were some paved areas, right, Jason, that we looked at and made sure that there's a map. It might be in your book. If not, there's a little table of goodies out on the table, too. You can see some of the activities that kids do. But on the map, there's some handicap-accessible locations that when kids go to tour, the teacher can plan that these are places that kids can get to safely. Because obviously they're old buildings and they don't have the ramp. But they did pick out places that would highlight goods and services and markets for them. The rest of the locations, as far as accessibility, were pretty much okay. We didn't have to do much. The ESL in department has been actively involved with all of these from the beginning. Translations are posted for field trip forms and all that stuff on the website so that the schools who have those translations need them and can send them home with kids.
Yeah.
Marcy, pretend I'm looking at you. And I'm curious, one roadblock I see in the packet is the permission slip. What are we doing to make sure we're twisting parents and guardians' arms to sign these things so every kid does get to participate?
So, every packet is meant to sort of be a one-stop shop. You probably saw that in the teacher guide. So they have their parent letter, their teacher letter, their a checklist. Teachers were kind of thrilled because the heavy lifting was sort of done for them because they didn't have to get transportation arranged. They didn't have to go figure out how to get the food there. I've done all that work for them. Food Services has ordered 11,000 meals in preparation for sending kids out for different experiences we have going on. That's not just to start, right? So what the teachers had to do then was send home the field trips. Pretty much an easy sell for a lot of them. And making sure that they understand that it's part of a whole class experience. It's not a reward activity. It's not something for just fun. It's not just a day out of school. This was a real, valid, integrated part of their learning. I've had administrators call and say they were trying to, so-and-so wasn't good last night, so they're not letting him go on the trip. And that was their, kind of old school mindset, like the punishment of kids not being able to go on something. And he had to talk through the parent and say, this is really part of their curriculum. This is the learning trip. They're going to be there learning all day, and like make it sound like, they're going to be learning. And she let them go. So it's going to be conversations with parents sort of wrapping their heads around, that it's not just a fun day out of school, that this, we definitely fun and engaging. Don't say they're great trips, but that the kids are really going to learn and take away some valuable pieces. I love this picture here. One of the teachers sent me this one just yesterday of the kids doing the butter churn, and that was my memory, one of my memories of field trips. I went, how many people, I had a butter churn memory. I know Mr. James had the dipping the candle into the candlestick memory, same one that Jason had, who now works at Farm. It's a powerful community connection. So I think that there's going to be some conversations, making sure parents are returning those for those, because that's definitely a something to get them back.
Any other questions? Okay, want to thank you very much, and we want to thank each of our guests and each of the organizations that you represent. Thank you for your outstanding stewardship and welcoming us into your home.
Thank you.
We have a presentation, I'm not sure, no? I'm sorry. Go to the consent agenda. Oh, okay, thank you. That's right, I'm sorry. Yes, sir. Let's move on. We need the approval of our previous minutes.
So moved.
It's been properly moved and seconded. Roll call?
Reverend Walker,
Yes.
Mr. Alexander,
Yes.
Mrs. Baylor,
Yes.
Mr. Bravo,
Yes.
Mrs. Lasher,
Yes.
Mrs. Mansfield,
Yes.
Mr. Miller,
Yes.
Okay. Our personnel recommendations? Mr. James?
Mr. President, I wish to recommend approval of the personnel recommendations presented in categories 5 through 16.
So moved.
Second.
Been moved and properly seconded. Any questions or comments? Hearing none, roll call?
Mr. Alexander,
Yes.
Mrs. Baylor,
Yes.
Mr. Bravo,
Yes.
Mrs. Lasher,
Yes.
Mrs. Mansfield,
Yes.
Mr. Miller,
Yes.
Reverend Walker.
Yes.
Next, Mr. President, I wish to recommend approval of the resolutions and motions presented in category 21, and I believe Mr. Pendleton has a presentation.
Thank you.
I can't make it that way.
Sorry.
It's not going to happen. It's not. Okay, here we go. We'll give this a minute to load, and hopefully it works. So my storytelling is a little bit different. The narrative definitely builds, like Marcy's over previous years, and lots of existing work from previous forecasts, previous board action. It's still not present. Share is red light. What's that mean? I think it turned off when the laptop got closed.
Minimize it for a moment, the right-hand corner. Minimize. E.
logged in. Did you log in? Mm-hmm. You got. Click on that. Yeah. And then. And it should be in this window. Click on it. Go. Boom.
Hey, all right, thank you. All right, we're in business. So we've been together for 5 years now. It's been hard to believe, right? 5 years that we've been reviewing the 5-year forecast together every October and May. Some of you may know that the law changed for forecast submissions is now at the end of November. But the forecast window period can be open. And so when a lawmaker was suggesting these changes, they were sensitive to November elections. And they wanted boards to have more discretion, talk more about when the timeliness of 5-year forecasts will be presented to their boards of education around November elections. So just keep that in mind. And the district focused to be the #1 urban school system in the United States. So our operations crew, our finance tech, HR, we really are that foundation. And we've recently been meeting together, and we like to be referenced as those who support innovation. We really tried to ground a lot of our work in the classroom and make it more relevant as we're meeting every week about those impacts that are going on in the classroom. So we're really behind pushing as hard as we can to make that process as efficient as possible. So we're very much enjoying our work together. So a couple points we want to walk away from today. Student wellness and success funding. We're going to talk quickly about revenue and expenses. You've seen the new financial format report, deficit spending trends, and then forecast and historical trends. And yes, we will talk a couple times throughout the presentation and probably answer questions as it relates to future revenue needs, i.e. levy. Yes, I said that word.
You did.
House Bill 166 is the new governor's budget initiative. We've been talking about this. We've been refreshed that the governor's initiatives are on social emotional well-being and wellness initiatives. It's been very hard for the financial folks in the room to put our thumb on where to put these dollars. It's very difficult when a 5-year forecast, especially what's required by law, is very academically focused when the state says in your first year, Akron Public Schools, we're going to give you $5 million, and in the second year, we're going to give you $7 million, and these are not direct instruction dollars. Oh, and by the way, we're not going to pass along those average annual increases that we'll see here in a minute that have been ranging in the 3% range. So think about that. So we got monies. Akron Public School received monies that were put into the education budget for the state of Ohio that were for non-academic purposes. They're for academic supports. And here's the language from the Auditor of States, which was a bit of, it needed some sorting out between a couple of state agencies before they came out and said, you should not include it in the 5-year forecast. We surveyed the state of Ohio. I serve on OASBO's board. We surveyed the state of Ohio, and the state of Ohio was split 50-50 as to whether or not these funds should be included in the forecast or not included in the forecast. All other funds in the forecast are academic, direct academic supports. So that was the argument for not including it. And we want to spend a little bit of time on this slide. One, because there's $12+ million in addition that's coming to Akron Public Schools. But there was more than $12+ million that we were counting on in direct instruction from the state budget that we did not receive. Furthermore, this $12 million, we are not allowed to include it in the 5-year forecast. We are allowed to what's called supplant. So we take existing supporting expenditures, counselors, community engagement, after-school programming, anything else that Akron has done above and beyond over the years, and we're allowed to take those expenditures and code them in this special fund. These funds are only in law for 2 years. So that creates an accounting mess, to say it lightly. So we pulled the revenue out of the forecast. We pulled the expenses out of the forecast. We code them in a special restricted fund, and we report that to the state of Ohio about what we're doing. And then we have to, as a board, an administration, and state as a whole, determine of whether or not these funds are going to remain. We have been told by state agencies that these funds should not be determined permanent. So what does that create? That creates a lot of uncertainty for the board's primary financial planning document, 5-year forecast. And so we'll go through that, ask lots of questions, because it's substantial changes. And those substantial changes, I don't know, I've had this conversation with a couple officials at the Department of Ed, saying, do you realize what will happen when districts like ours are counting on state aid, don't receive the state aid, and then take out $12 million of revenue and expenses from our forecast? Things won't look as good. So whatever you do about either requiring it in the forecast or not requiring it, that has to be done across the state, because when the state legislature looks at your cash balance, they want to look at everybody's cash balance. And so these statements of cash position across the state are going to need to be interpreted for the legislature. And unfortunately, this is going to be a few-year cycle that we're going to have to move through. Okay, let's talk about sources of revenue, and then we'll summarize sources of expenditures. And then I want to put that whole first slide really into perspective. Remember, in the last few presentations, I had a little bit different. I looked at the average 5-year trend of revenue and expense growth. This is a little bit different from our new reports that you've seen. So on the left, the bar charts, the important point here is this frames for you where you should look. You should look at state funding and real estate. All other components of income are just not that significant. What is growing from 19 to 24? If you notice in very subtle form that we become a little bit more reliant on state funding and a little less reliant on local real estate. You've known from my previous forecasts that the average annual growth rate for real estate property, which is significant, over 30%, is pretty stagnant. So the only real growth that we get in revenue is either by raising new monies or any state monies. So it further complicates that first slide of saying you got $12 million plus, here's the exact way you use it, and you can't use it on your forecast. The right side of this chart, where the numbers are a little bit more like what you've seen in the previous reports. That first column, historical average annual change, that is a 5-year number rolling to that. So on average, all of our revenue has equaled about 2.6% average annual growth rate over a 5-year period. The projected 5-year, with the impact of that state funding line where you see that negative 3.5 million, is now trending at 0.93. That's pretty substantial. In fact, at least in my last 10 years, I don't remember a number like that for the quintile of districts like ours, the higher socioeconomic districts. So that's how much we were counting on the state aid from a new biennium, a governor that had some surplus funds, albeit I know we have signs of recession coming, but they're nowhere reflected in state and local collections. They're actually up. I wanted to include the long-term enrollment chart for you because I'm proud of the enrollment. I mean, there had been significant declines, by a number of hundred of students every year, and that has started to taper off. We're still predicting some declines in student enrollment. We look at live birth rates, we look at local, do deep dives with technology and HR to see mobility rates all around the city. Anybody that wants to study enrollment, we have lots of tools at our disposal to see that. I also put this up on the screen to tell you that the state froze the formula. So the number of students that we have are not getting funded. So for the first time after remember Strickland's OEBM attempts, remember the constitutional amendment, remember all the efforts and local advocacy that we made about, hey, we're stemming the tide of our declining enrollment. We should be rewarded for that. We should be funded for the number of so less students are going. We were just guaranteed in law for 2 years on 2019 enrollment numbers. So whether our student population goes up or down right now, like last year, there were a couple charter and community schools that closed. If that happened and students came to us 50, 100, 150, we would not be funded additional funds. So the formula was frozen for 2 years in law. That is something very much that we are advocating with House Bill 305 and other components of the formula. So I wanted to put that slide up there to say, even though that shows a decline, those were major wins for us in slowing that tide of enrollment decline or in terms of choice out. And in real dollars, right? When we first got here 5 years ago, we were at 35 million in transfers out of the district. We're now at the 27 million mark. The same chart for expenditures. You look at the top slide, and salaries, benefits, and purchase service represent those three components of those two bar charts. We're a service-oriented industry. Salaries and benefits make up between 70 and 80% of our budget. And that's all school districts. Now, the business model and the story is the historical average annual change in that first column of an average 5-year up to date of almost 3% growth. That's not uncommon and not unreasonable. And then a projected at 3.27. And what compounds that is we just transferred that $5 and that $7 million of expenses, and then at the third year, because it's not in law, we put those $12 million of expenses right back in the forecast. And yes, I did predict about 3%, just so everybody knows that I'm not taking expenses back in and not putting the revenue. I went back to our previous estimates to say, yes, we're still anticipating about a 3% average annual growth rate for state aid. So I put that back in the third year of the budget as well. All right, so let's frame what kind of impact that has leading up to the forecast and then turn it over to you. This is at the start of all your monthly financial reports. This is our expenses and revenue. Total expenses are in the light gray, total revenue is in the black, and our cash balance is the yellow line. You see that yellow line in decline, and if you're like me and you read that first slide of the monthly financial, what do I always start with? You know, expenses are outpacing revenue. Someday that day is kind of here. And so you'd read that first line like I do, and I'm like, I really have to change that first sentence because people are just glossing over it at this point. So let's make it a little bit more real. So in the fifth year of the forecast, and that's the sticker shock here, and I get it, but don't forget on July 1, we're leaving behind another fiscal year. So we just added one. And so it's not a substantial trend change. It's just we're picking up a new year when we're at the end of our cyclical nature of school finance when every district needs to go for operating funds. So it's a big number. That big number of 49 million was added, but it's not outside of the trend of what we were forecasting. As a reminder, 1 month's payroll's 15 million. These are really big numbers and bigger than most districts have in terms of an overall operating budget. So let's try to put it in perspective. As we looked at 5 years ago when we started the cash reserve policy, and I would give credit to the board, you did the cash reserve policy not in time of need, but in a time of planning. So you talked about the importance of a cash reserve policy because you're still feeling from what happened in 2012. And what feeling resonated from that was the reduction of program. And that's what no one wants. No one wants the reduction of programming to pass an operating levy, right? So the proactive approach you put in place with the cash reserve, and that's why I handed that out and highlighted a couple items at your setting there. The Government Finance Officers Association recommends a minimum cash balance of no less than 2 months operating expenses. So if you look at our 5-year forecast number, we're carrying over this year an estimated $60 million at cash reserves at the end of this school year. That's a lot of money.
Mm-hmm.
That's 2 months' expenses for us. So let's take that story down a little bit further. Our annual budget's about $380 million. That's general fund. In 2022, third year of our forecast, our cash balance is around $22 million. 10% of our budget, or where our trigger for our cash reserve policy, is $38 million. And the shall in the board policy is that the treasurer shall notify the board. And I highlighted that section. Highest months of expenses when we looked over this year, that year of 2022 and the 12 is about $35 million. Local tax collections about 30. The revenue surplus, we're deficit spending pretty significantly by then. And the cash balance benchmark is out to the side. It's a busy chart. I know, and I'm sorry, but this is the month-to-month cash flow for the district every year of the 5-year forecast. So remember, at the 5-year forecast, I include the one that has our cash reserve policy, and it gives you the forward 2 years. This is that only scaled to all 5. So if you look at the first blue bar for 2020, which is the current fiscal year, if you look in, I don't know, can you see my cursor? Mm-hmm. Okay. If you look in January and in June, those are the 2 months which give us the most heartburn about cash flow. Now, fiscal 20, we're in really good shape. Now let's jump ahead to fiscal 2022 is the green chart. As we close the books at the 21-22 school year, or fiscal 22, with $22 million. So what does that mean? Because one, the board's cash reserve policy puts that into perspective. That means in January, that green chart, in June, we do not have enough in the checkbook to make our expenses. We don't want to be there. Now, that happens from time to time in school districts. Sometimes there's not planning involved with that. Sometimes the inevitable that you can't raise additional funds. There are ways in which we can manage cash flow to make sure that we don't default on our payments. The important component back here on all the numbers has to be that I know today will trigger lots of conversation, and they will be grounded in program. So the monies have to support the programs in place and that standard that you've worked so hard to set. Well, this is the forecast. This is what I'm required to show you. This is the quick summary, the details in your report. I'll put that up on the charts and answer the first question that I've already gotten today from possibly media, in which I've been kind of pushing this out. So I know this is a big change, is 1, levy, and 2, is it going to happen to us today? So no, right? So this We're adding a new fiscal year, so you see that fifth year where you see that negative 50 million. That will catch the attention of the state agency, Ohio Department of Education. They may or may not contact the superintendent and I, depending on that deficit in 2023, about what are you doing about your upcoming deficit. Again, their job is to protect, just like ours is about the program. That does not mean that we need to pass operating funds today. It is the beginning of our conversation. The first thing that we need to do as a cabinet and a board is to say, can we balance the budget for 2020? And that deficit is about $1.8 million. As requested by the media already from a previous report, is that number is about 200,000. Remember, this changes every month. The Wellness and Success Funds definitely had a drag on this component as we're transferring out expenses and not getting as much revenue as we thought. That more important point is the fiscal 2021 deficit of over 11 million. That's a pretty substantial deficit that we don't want to cut our way out of. So that's that planning and discussion needs to start now. But I will pause for questions. As you are there, I put a few of those questions up on the board.
Patrick. Couple comments, maybe some questions sprinkled throughout. I guess, I think first, thank you for the presentation. One thing that I think I want to point out, even though it seems like you're playing the part of doom and gloom today, is
I'm playing that part today.
I think the good work that's really gone on with this board, with the superintendent and the CFO's office, to sort of stretch things out as far as we have. And that's really, I'm being genuine in that statement because, we've done the homework and we've mentioned the statistic several times that as far back as we've researched, the longest we've stayed off of the ballot is 9 years, and that was in the 70s. We've come back to that, and it's been 7 years since we did the last levy, and we all remember how far we cut the last time a levy didn't pass in 2011 and the cuts that followed that. We've worked very hard both here and in the superintendent's office and the CFO's office, and even working with our bargaining units and their leadership to really work and push this out as far as we can and be responsible with the dollars that we have. So although it seems a lot of doom and gloom, I just wanted to open it up by saying kudos to you and your team and the superintendent and his team for everybody working together to do what we can. That being said, 2022, we fall below the district's cash reserve policy. And, we took baby steps from a finance committee perspective and then to the full board. When we instituted this cash reserve policy, we did put a shall in there, but it was a shall notify the board that, hey, we're gonna fall below this recommended cash reserve policy. We didn't put any teeth to it. That's not a question, but a statement that maybe I'd like to circle back to at Finance Committee at some point, that it would be worth exploring what that would look like if that had a little bit more like, no, you can't. And so then at least triggering something a little sooner, but still leaving open the possibility that the board could bypass that and authorize something in the future that let us dip below that. But I'd love to see some more teeth behind that. And then you've got the nearly $11 million in 23 and the $50 million, negative $50 million cash balance in 2024. Clearly, at this point, with the expense projections that you provided at roughly 3%, we are still not at an expense problem. Nobody in this district doesn't have a spending problem. It has a revenue problem. It has a state funding problem. So I just want to say, too, for what it's worth saying again, I think that gives us all more reason why we need to continue to support and grow what started as the Cup-Patterson plan and is now the Fair School Funding model or Fair School Funding plan. We need to really work to get behind that and see that at some point becomes a reality, and still the closest we've come, I think, in recent history to at least solving some of this problem. So I'll leave it there. To Today, though, is not just the beginning of the conversation, because I know we've been having this conversation and we've been encouraging us to have this conversation earlier and earlier so that we could sort of have the levy discussion and put the levy before the voters on our terms when we wanted to and not when we were backed into feeling like,
A good way to say it.
because the problem is, right, if we, depending on when we pass the ballot or when we put the ballot before or the levy before the voters, as we continue to have this discussion, so I'm not suggesting, we have it now or here, is important because we saw what happened the last time that we put it on at the wrong time or that we didn't support it in the right way and it failed. And what we had to do, if this were, depending on when we pass this, say even a 21 before you get to that 22 mark, what happens if it fails? Because there's no easy fixes there to solve that. Is that probably an immediate sort of fiscal emergency and oh my goodness, and yeah, so we need to have some thoughtful discussion around this. I think we're up to the task. We've all been there before, so I'll be quiet. Thank you.
Anyone else? Yes.
Could you talk a little bit more about the Wellness and Success Fund and how that is impacting what you're forecasting in 22, 23, 24? And also, given what a dramatic change we saw with basically one piece of legislation, do you imagine that there are other things on the horizon that could also significantly shift this?
So your first question was talk a little bit more about success and wellness funds, and then we'll talk about future impact of that. The shock was most of our colleagues around the state of Ohio would say we never anticipated with the surplus at the state budget, the talks of where the governor has been versus previous administrations, that we would see that large of a commitment into the education budget. It wasn't in other supporting service agencies. It was in education. It was a K-12 education, $675 million over 2 years. And the direction that these came across like temporary monies, and you were not to include them in your general operating budget. You could use them to support and supplant. So that was a bit of a shock. Why we're on that point, that is the more difficult thing to say. Will they be available? The governor has said here recently, as this House Bill 305 Fair School Funding talk has evolved, those would be great. That $670 million would be great to put into the Fair School Funding Plan, because there's areas in which they have the social emotional well-being components that you can track the outcome. There's no strings to this money right now. So the governor has said no. But, the supports around the governor has said, no, I want these monies to stay where they're at. With such a sizable investment, in answering your follow-up question, does that mean that the K-12 education budget of what we're predicting is even going to be less? Does that mean there won't be any other monies available for the direct instruction components of our budget? Of which I'm not overly conservative, meaning my estimates, I've got 3% that third year coming back into the instruction component. So I'm not saying we're not going to get any money from the state of Ohio, because I do believe that we will. The accounting game, back to your accounting question, that's very difficult, because we were just instructed by the state auditor's office and the Department of Ed to remove $12 million of revenue and expenses from our budget, put them in a restricted fund, and treat them as if they were temporary monies. As you know how the forecast work, it compounds. So $5 million of additional revenue this year is going to be $5 million, and an additional $5 million is going to compound through the forecast. We were told that we have to remove that and treat them like they're temporary funds. So that's pretty difficult. It really takes those revenues and expenses and cuts them out of the forecast, and then brings the expense component back in the third year. That's what creates some havoc here on our numbers. And to Patrick's point, the state has a process, which we haven't seen here for some time, thankfully, called Fiscal Watch, Caution, in emergency. Emergency comes with a lot more strings attached from the state. There's a bordering district here that's going through some of that, where the state can supersede some of the board's decisions for finances. And so technically speaking, that's why I say the superintendent, I might get a letter written from the state superintendent on the deficit. I know there'll be early steps into the fiscal caution, whether we qualify or not, that's for the state to determine, but they will say, how do you plan on addressing this deficit? And we'll say, don't forget, you had us pull out $12 million of funds, and then what do you want us to do? So that would be part of our narrative and how we respond. I hope that answered. But
Yeah, thank
it is really confusing for us, the practitioners, to tell the boards, we're moving this $12 million to the side, and it may or may not come back in revenue, but it is definitely coming back in expense.
Yes.
I just want to sort of piggyback on something Patrick was talking about. How we've been fiscally responsible and almost historic, time frame, not going back to property owners for additional funding. We made some hard decisions over the past, 8 years, closing buildings, things of that nature. And we don't have the luxury of those kind of cuts in front of us anymore. So I think, I don't know, Ryan, if you can go back to your busy chart, and I'd just be curious, if we did apply what the GFOA state should be, your cash balance policy, we might be too late in talking about, going to the ballot. So, I think we're sooner the better we have that discussion, because I don't want to be the person sitting here cutting programs and cutting employees and things of that nature. I think, and we talked about that. We want to be proactive, not reactive when it comes to our budget. So I think we really need to take a hard look sooner than later, yesterday. So just, keeping that in mind at this table and, out there to our stakeholders as well.
Yes.
Kind of a question, but also a bit of a comment. It's interesting to have the presentation about the essential experiences today and then to have this conversation. And I think it's easy for us to have both of those conversations because we know where the money is coming from for programs like the essential experience. And then you look at this chart and we know what that means. But for a lot of people who would just hear these two presentations, they might think, well, gosh, of course you're in a deficit. Your kids get to go to all these cool places. And I think making that point really clear that these kinds of experiences that our kids are getting is not the reason that we're in this financial picture now. And thanks very much to partners like the GAR Foundation, but all of these folks listed on there, that just feels like a conversation that we need to have more of, that the fabulous experiences our students are having are very much not connected to the downward decline of our cash flow. That's a very different story.
Any other comments? Very valid points, and as each of you have pointed out, and I know I have mentioned wanting to be proactive and that we need to be thinking about this levy later on down in the agenda under the president's remarks. We've asked you to think about date for retreat, think about where we might want to have the retreat. Part of CUBE, one of the sessions, the presenter emphasized emphatically that if you have a retreat, and I think Mr. Miller and I are on the same presentation, to have it off-site. It just has a different feeling to what you're doing. We need to begin to be thinking now and not later as to what direction we want to go, how do we want to handle those things. There are pieces, moving pieces that will be presented. We hope to have Mr. Bravo make a presentation about early childhood education. Where does all that play in? in this retreat and a number of things. So we're at that point where we really need to begin to not only think, but plan and move forward in that direction. Okay. Thank you very much. At this time, we need a resolution, a motion to accept our consent agenda.
So moved.
So it's been properly moved and seconded. Any questions or comments? Hearing none, roll call.
Mr. Alexander?
Yes.
Mrs. Baylor?
Yes.
Mr. Bravo?
Yes.
Mrs. Lasher?
Yes.
Mrs. Mansfield?
Yes.
Mr. Miller?
Yes.
Reverend Walker?
Yes. Mr. Superintendent, Dr. James?
And finally, Mr. President, I wish to recommend approval of the business affairs recommendations presented in category 23.
So moved.
Second.
Probably moved and seconded. Any questions or comments? Hearing none, roll call.
Mrs. Baylor?
Yes.
Mr. Bravo?
Yes.
Mrs. Lasher?
Yes.
Mrs. Mansfield?
Yes.
Mr. Miller?
Yes.
Reverend Walker?
Yes.
Mr. Alexander?
Yes.
Superintendent's report.
No report tonight.
Okay, and then I sort of jumped ahead, President's report, but I think we need to look at our calendars. After the election, when can we gather our thoughts? So between now and the next board meeting, please look at your calendars, have some dates available. You can share them between now and then to Mr. Miller and myself, so we can begin to look at those things and plans. If you know of a facility, it has not been out of our practice. We have in the past gone down to Canton I always forget the place, Glenmore. And we had a Friday, Saturday. We came after Friday evening, had dinner, a session, and then early session on Saturday, and left around noon or 1 or something like that. So those are things that we have done in the past, so it's not out of the ordinary.
Can I make a suggestion? Can we perhaps have maybe Ruth Ryman put together a doodle poll, or if she wants to shoot me some dates, I'd be happy to put together a doodle poll. It might be a little easier than us all just sending you dates, because then she could look at the treasurer and superintendent schedules and let us know when they're available, and then we can see how we all fit into that, because I mean, I can send you, 12 dates, but if they're out of town or if they're.
Sure.
And maybe include
Point
some
well taken. We
options
need to
for
do that.
that where there's more time, because a full day is kind of hard. Maybe we could break it up. I don't know. I mean, I'd be willing to try. I know there's a lot of us that there's a lot of hefty schedules to probably try and coordinate, but I mean, I'd be willing to try if.
Okay. Well, we'll have, is that okay with the superintendent to have her to do that? And then, again, still would need your input as far as places, other options. And they can be looking as well.
I will try and think of some places, but I fully agree with you. I think off-site, without some of the noise, without the distraction, we've typically been very fortunate to be able to do that, so I think that's a good idea.
All right. Treasurers, any additional comments?
Yeah, I have to follow up the forecast with a fun, positive note. So today I met with Thomas.
Oh, yay.
I had a chance to meet with him a little bit, and I gave him an advocacy coin. It's the first student I've ever given the coin to. As I come across colleagues and board members, superintendents, treasurer, anybody that's advocated on behalf of kids, I give them a challenge coin, and it's got the state logo. So this was the first student I've ever given the coin to. And took a picture with Thomas for the high school paper there. He was thrilled. He greeted me by saying, "Can you believe we made the paper?" He was super cute. But I transitioned from treasurer to father, really proud of him very quickly, and told him how much we appreciated his efforts. So
It's a great story.
yeah, it's a great story.
That's great.
And we do want to thank you for the Wonderful article, well done. I think it was well done.
Very nice.
And we appreciate it.
That picture of the teacher and him as well, if you could give kudos to.
That was really cute.
That was fantastic.
Okay. Committee reports, legal, contract, board policy,
None.
none. Finance, capital management,
None report.
instructional policy, student achievement,
No further reports?
no report. Unfinished business, new business. We do need to go into executive session, and per several 121.22 G1 and G3 for the purpose of employment and for the purpose of legal counsel to discuss disputes involving the board and/or school board, school district that are subject to pending or imminent court action. I need a motion.
So moved.
Second, I guess.
Been properly moved, seconded. And roll call.
Mr. Bravo?
Yes.
Mrs. Lasher?
Yes.
Mrs. Mansfield?
Yes.
Mr. Miller?
Yes.
Reverend Walker?
Yes.
Mr. Alexander?
Yes.
Mrs. Baylor? Thank you.
Okay, we will proceed to our normal place.
Secret place.